Hello, hello. Okay, as you can tell from the title of this video, today I'm going to be talking about backgrounds, or maybe sunsets, whatever I name it, it doesn't matter. Okay, so people ask me all the time, how do you draw backgrounds? And the short answer to that is the same way you draw a foreground. Like there's not much difference, other than maybe background's a little bit more painty. But I know why people ask me that. It's because a lot of my drawings, which I guess I've thrown up some of them already, I have the tendency to especially draw sunsets. And I like doing that because I just like colors. And because it's fun. It's fun for me to do that. So I guess today what I'm going to be doing is I'll be drawing a sunset. And that's basically just the gist of it. Now, this is probably going to be messier than normal because even though this isn't as time consuming as you might think it still does consume some amount of time. Now, most of this is going to be brush settings, I think. But that's later. Let's start at the beginning. You want to make a sunset, right? Okay. So, first step is going to be planning. It doesn't matter what it is. It's going to be planning. So, what I want to do is not concentrate on having something in the foreground in this particular image because that's not going to be the focus of it, so this might be a little bit different. But I still would like to have something for scale and whatnot. So I'll probably put some plant life or something over here on the side. Just something that's going to be blacked out. Now, if you know anything about light, that's probably the foremost thing that you need to know before we get started doing this sort of thing, is if you need to actually understand how light works. You have to pick a light source. In this particular image, I guess my light source is going to be kind of more or less directly in the center. Just for the sake of simplicity, maybe a little bit different. But let's see. I think I want water with a little bit of plants up in the center, and that's about it. Don't place your horizon. This is kind of a very simple thing, but do not place your horizon directly in the center of the screen. Like, there's certain things you don't do. Don't place your horizon in the center of the screen. Don't place a character directly in the center of the screen unless you absolutely have to, unless that you're focusing really hard on them. Don't have big wads of completely negative space where there's nothing going on, where there's huge amounts of information on the other side, unless you're doing something it's a sight by eye, design by sight sort of thing. So, but in this case, you don't have to worry about that because we're just doing a simple little sunset. Okay, so planning stage. Just plants, water right here, and I guess my sunset is probably going to be either dead center. Yeah, probably more or less dead center. So probably kind of always flip your canvas. Probably somewhere around there. So let's actually make this a little bit bigger so I know exactly where the roundness of this thing is going to be coming into play. So yeah, it'll look something like that. Let's get rid of you. Move you around to exactly where it needs to be. Let me actually align. You see my preview window over here. I'm going to line it directly in the center. Okay, that looks more or less where it should be. Move it a little bit over here. Just because I like it there. That's just for me. Alright. So now that we've done that, we're pretty much done as far as our planning goes. That's the advantage of... This is the reason why I like doing sunsets, because they're so simple. You just need a big round object, and then that's pretty much it. And a bunch of negative and positive space. Now, you could get really intricate and start trying to draw, oh, this cloud will be here, and it'll have this particular shading. Don't do that. Just trust me on this one. That's probably not the best thing you should be doing. There will be a reflection here, though. Okay, so step 2 in this is actually probably the best thing to do is to go through and just look at sunsets. Google image search is good for this. Just pull up generic sunset, or Yahoo search, whatever you're doing. Just pull those up. Get yourself some nice reference material. Now, I'm not going to be... Well, I guess I could sample it later. But I'm not going to be concentrating too much on this. But I just want you to look at it and get an idea of what exactly sunset is supposed to look like. So you'll notice some sort of commonalities with these things. Let's bring in some more of them. Hell of it. Like 1 or 2 of them. I'll just pick up the top ones. That way you guys... This will be easy. You guys can pick up the same exact ones that I'm looking at right now. Should be pretty easy. Okay, so just looking at these things, you can sort of see the gist of what a sunset is. You know, it's just a big ball of gas burning brightly, many, many millions of feet, feet away from Earth. And general gist of it, it sort of light tends to sort of billow out and form sort of a, I don't know, how do I describe this? Sort of like a Milky Way or galaxy shape if you're viewing it from the side. Tends to do that, even with this one over here. This one is a little bit different because there's so much cloud cover that it's actually obscuring a lot of it, and a lot of the light as a result is casting off the clouds back here, up, and that's the reason why these clouds up here have such a shine on their undersides. That's another thing to look for. Is understanding the shape of the clouds and why they look the way that they are. The clouds themselves are just bunches of gas, like it's just vapor, right? So what's actually going on is the sun, like here's the curvature of the Earth. The sun is going just below it, and the light is, let's see, like here's come on. Like here's the Earth, and the sun's over here. This doesn't make any sense. It's so small, but it's over here, sun's going down. What's actually happening is it keeps going down. Then the light, I'm not going to explain the science behind this, but the light starts casting in a particular spectrum so that the only thing that you're actually seeing is reds and yellows and oranges. You sort of start to lose the blue. So that's the reason why whenever you have a sunset, usually you get this, where you have this complete spectrum of light, where you have the white of the sun because you're looking directly at it. Then you have the corona, comes out to yellow, and it kind of blisters out into a orange and a red. But then it sort of fades back into the normal sky color because you're not losing all the light just yet. And at that point, the further up you go, the darker it gets. And that's true of any of these. The further back you go, like you notice here, like here's where the blue is ending. And it's important to look and understand things like this because you're going to be painting it. And that's the next thing to talk about, I guess, is whenever you're doing this, you don't draw it. Like normally I'm just an illustrator because I just like illustrating. I just like making line work. But when it comes to doing something like this, you can't do that. You have to paint it. The reason why I've been kind of putting off doing a video like this before is just because making a picture like this takes so long, usually, that I don't think I can really cover as much information as I possibly could. But since I'm doing it this way, it's probably not going to take as much time. Unless I just sit here talking about it. Then it'll take a lot of time, right? Right. Okay. So, first thing, actually, let's move our primary here. Let's merge these two. I'm going to rename this primary so that I know what I'm working with. So the first thing we will do, make one layer. We're going to be using different layers, but it's not going to matter too much. And let's make our horizon line first. And let's see, do any of these pictures have, like, another thing to consider is if you're doing water like I am, the same thing, like the lighting is the same because it's reflecting, but it's going to be a little bit different because instead of working with gas up here, you're working with a liquid down here. So as a result, the way that light refracts and so on is going to be a little bit different. Another thing to notice is whenever things fade in the background into the atmosphere, they become the same exact color as everything. Like it becomes a uniform color the further back you go. If you're viewing like mountains or a forest and it goes way, way into the back of the horizon, you'll notice that the mountains or whatever, which you would think would be gray, end up becoming a blue color and end up sort of becoming this hazy, bluish gray that sort of just fades out of reality entirely. And of course, for obvious reasons, that's because it's being obscured with the atmosphere that you're seeing in between those two things. Between you and that object, you're seeing atmosphere. So, what I think I will do is, it doesn't really matter, don't worry too much about getting the color right first thing. But I think I'll start with a darker color just for the hell of it. So let's just adjust this. It doesn't really matter what it is. You can just start with a complete blue if you want to. It doesn't really matter. In fact, let's just do that. Here's where the water is, so it's going to be blue. This to show you guys that it doesn't really matter at this point. Now make sure to contain these things to their own layer so that you can adjust their saturation and whatnot values beforehand. So that's our water layer. Let's put that layer up here. Name it water so we don't lose track of it, even though I can see it, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to name this sky, and this is behind it. So even if I fill the whole thing, then since we have water on top of that layer, it doesn't matter. And let's see. Our sunset is going to be behind the water, but it's going to be on top of the sky. So we'll put a third layer in the middle called sun. Now, it doesn't matter too much that it's going to be perfectly round or not. It doesn't really matter at all. Good way of doing this is to take any round brush, really. Like you can barely see it there. Take any round brush at all. I'm going to increase the saturation a few times. It's not like Photoshop where you get a full range every time. Okay. Something like that. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, now we can turn our primary off. We get ourselves a nice bright red sun for the time being. Alright, now here's where the complications sort of come into play. There we go. The important thing now is brush settings. And I hate talking about brush settings. It is the most miserable thing in the world to me. People ask me all the time, well, your brush... If you have HD, you should be able to see them on the side. There's no reason to ask me that question. There's no reason to bother me with it. Because you can pause the video and just look at it. Unless you're viewing on like mobile or something, which I imagine a lot of people are. Why are you watching art videos on a phone? Anyways. Okay, so normally my settings I won't go into at all. This is Paint Tool Psi for those that don't know. It doesn't really matter too much. But, for example, let's say that I was trying to use a binary pen to paint clouds. This is not going to work. Like, you see what's happening here? This binary pen, I'm painting clouds. These don't look like clouds at all. Of course they don't look like clouds. They don't have any blending. They don't look like clouds. They don't fade. They're not gas. So you have to pick the right brush for the right thing. Let's try a normal brush, like this. That does have this going on the sides, but you'll notice that I'm trying to make a very light stroke. All that's doing is making it smaller. So even if I'm doing this, then it still doesn't look like a cloud because I'm not blending anything. So I can just keep doing that over and over and sample a much lighter color and do it that way, and then sample in between that, then sample in between this, the intermediate color between the two the things. Because if you see right here, whenever we're laying down one of these colors, then the brush, the texture that the brush is using actually creates little itty-bitty minor variations in the color to make it look like it's blending. Photoshop also does this. If you're using Photoshop, you must do this method in order to blend things together. If you ever wondered how people paint like skin tones or something in Photoshop, this is how you do it. You take one color and then you take another color. Let's actually... Hold on, I should be working on a different layer for experimentation. You take one color over here and you take another color, let's just say green or something, over here. Ooh, that's rough. Okay, and we have these two colors. Now you go in, you don't have to zoom in this hard, but I'm just doing it for the sake of clarity, and you find something that's in between these two colors. Like this, for example, or probably about more like this, I guess. And you go through and you put down that blended color. And this looks terrible because it's green and red, but... So you would do the same thing on this end. Pick an intermediate color and just keep doing this. And if it looks terrible, that's because that's how Photoshop is. It looks awful. And you have to spend hours just doing this over and over and over again. And it's getting more and more granular over and over and over again until things actually start to blend together. You see how that works? You just keep doing this. You keep finding that one intermediate little color, and you just keep doing this over and over and over again until things actually look like they have blended. And it just takes a long, long time. But that's how you do that sort of fading in Photoshop. You can do it here using, Psi too. But the advantage of using something like Psi or Painter X or something like that is that it has brushes that are specifically made for this problem. So, for example, I set up for myself I have like a blending color brush. I have a blur brush that comes standard with Psi, I'm pretty sure. I don't think I made any alterations to this whatsoever. But if you do like the blur brush, for example, notice I can just go over it and just does it automatically. It's done. We're done. That's it. That's all you have to do. That's a great thing about a program that is made to paint. Photoshop is not made to paint. Photoshop is made to alter photos. It is awful as a painting program. It is absolutely miserable. But it does have its uses. So, there's disadvantages and disadvantages to everything. And this blending color one, like there's different... If you're wondering how to set this up, it's different for every program, but in Psi specifically, you can go into your little thing over here, right-click inside this area, and you can choose one of the default sort of beginning brush settings. And this is just ways that the program calculates things. That's all that's going on. Like there's a pencil sort of brush, an airbrush, watercolor brush, a marker, the eraser, and then there's like selection brushes you don't have to worry about, the fill bucket and binary pen. They all do different things. Like it doesn't matter how many adjustments I make to a binary pen, it's never going to blend because that's what it does. It is a binary pen. That's all it does. It makes it so that there's no blending at all on the edges. I like using this in illustrations because you don't have to worry about it whatsoever. Okay. So in the case of like a blending color brush, we used blur last time. This is sort of like the normal brush, except now it has more, I guess, more of a personality to it. So you still get the sort of texture behind it. And by the way, I'm just using a generic, this is default. Like you can go in here and select spread and noise, spread, bristle, flat bristle. I usually use spread and noise, I just like the look of it. It's pretty good for making clouds too. So whenever you're going to be drawing clouds, these are the things that you need to worry about. You need to have the right brush for doing this. If you like lay down something like this, and actually hold on, if you use a brush and you lay down something and it looks like this, that's probably not the right brush to be using for making a cloud, okay? Like you can move this out and, sort of make use of it, but, and I'll probably be using the binary brush to lay down hard areas in the meantime, but you want something that's actually going to blend into something that you can recognize as being cloud-like. And that goes, even if you're not doing a cloud, if you're doing something that's like I don't know, like if you're doing rays of sunshine, if you're drawing a plant leaf, or you're drawing a person's eye or something, you just want to pick the right brush for the right job. It's the same thing in real life. In real life, we wouldn't have to worry about any of this, but we would still have to pick up the right brush. Like for painting, you would pick up the right brush that's the right size, it has the right amount of bristles on it, it has the right thickness, and then you would apply it to the canvas and look at it and say, well, that's not quite the size that I need, or it's blending, but it's blending it too heavy, like it's carrying too much of the paint in one direction or something. There's a million things. That just comes from experience. But pick the right brush. If you don't have the right brush, it doesn't matter how much effort that you're expending on it, it will not look right. And a lot of the times with these expert Photoshop painters who are way better at it than I am, they will make these things, and most of it is just the brush. Like if you watch them doing it, and you take your default Photoshop brush, which is just like a generic, like it looks like this. It's like a drafting thing. Hold on, let me get rid of my... Yeah, there's no texture on it. Okay. It just looks sort of like that. That's sort of like a generic Photoshop brush almost. Like I've adjusted my settings a little bit, but you get the idea. So if you're doing that with the default thing and following exactly the same thing that they do, like they just say something simple like draw a line. They'll take your brush or whatever and just go along the sides and do that or something. You'll be doing this and it'll look like this, and you'll say, well, that doesn't look the same as what they're doing. And they'll do it and they'll do like this, and it'll look completely different. And you'll get frustrated because you say, well, what am I supposed to do then? How come, like, what did I not do correctly that it didn't result in the same exact motion that they did? And the answer usually is their brush settings. There are brush settings, there are pin pressure settings. It could be a million different things. I'm not going to cover all of them. But a lot of it just comes down to that, just that preparation work of knowing exactly what brush you should be using. But thankfully, Sai is nice enough that it just has brushes that are made for that sort of thing. That's why I wouldn't recommend trying to learn to do something like this in Photoshop. Because Photoshop, again, is made for editing photos that are already complete. It is not meant for you to paint in it. It is bad for that. You can do it, but it's bad for that. There's no arguing against that either. Okay, so all that to the side, let's start trying to adjust things. Alright, so sky, let's actually look at our reference images real fast. Whichever ones that we want to pull up. And you can actually lift colors, like if you want to. You can pull in like a reference image and say, I'll probably do some of this too. I'll say, this is going to be my base sky tone. So we'll go down, we'll sample this, like I'm holding the Alt key, by the way, to sample that, or you could use your eyedropper tool up here, or whatever. And go down to my sky, and we'll fill in, and you notice it's a brown. You wouldn't think that. You think, well, isn't it supposed to be like orange or red or something? No. Because if you view this, you can tell that it's supposed to be blue, right? But we sampled it, and it's a brown. That's because the colors that are around it. Now, I could go into color theory and why that's the case, but just realize that if you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to have a blue sky up here, and you go over to your blues and you pick like a low saturation blue or something, you lay it down and you notice, oh, that doesn't look right. That's why. This is the importance of knowing what you're working with. Like being able to sample the image really helps a lot in this case. So let's do the same thing like down here for our water. We'll fill that in. You notice it's almost sort of this black. Like you notice it's in the blue spectrum. Way down here. And very low saturation. Like the saturation we go over here. This is heavy saturation. This is low saturation. This is a low saturation blue. It's almost black. That's how bad it is. And you notice if we sample this, the sky that's nearest that region, it's almost the same thing. If we do the sky, see, almost the same thing. That's because of the way that light works in this case. So we can do the same thing with our sun if we wanted to. Let's turn that off. See that we did that. See, it's not filling in correctly. And Sai, by the way, one thing that you can do if you'll not actually hold on. This is something worth covering, I guess. You notice, like I tried to fill in here. I used my bucket and I just tried to select it, and it does almost sort of do it. But if you're trying to wonder, well, how do I get it to change to the exact color that I want? And you can sit here. Control U, by the way, pulls up this hue and saturation menu in Sai. It does in Photoshop too, I'm pretty sure. And you can try to find the exact precise thing, or you can be smart about it, make a new layer, turn it into a clipping group up here, clipping group, and then just paint that entire group. And that makes it so that the color that you put on top, it's a mask, basically, is what it's doing. It's masking for the sun that's below it. That's what a clipping group does inside of Sai. Like if I turn this off, you know, it's everything. Like this is what I actually put there. I took my brush and I took my bucket and I just filled the whole canvas. But if I turn it to a clipping group, it only applies to whatever layer is right below it. So that's the easy way to get around that. If you don't understand that, just do it, and then you will understand it. It'll make perfect sense to you. Like if I draw like more things on the sun area, like let's pick a different color, like it's green now. And I do that on my sun layer. Then you'll notice, wait, what happened to my, oh, I merged it, sorry. I thought, well, I'm making this demonstration and I'm ruining it. But we pick green, I have my clipping layer back because I accidentally undid it. And you notice I'm painting with green, but it's red. And that's because the clipping group on top of it is actually causing it to become red. And that's because it's set to normal. If I change it to multiply or something, it'll still have the same rule, except now it's working as a multiply layer instead of a normal layer. So that's just how that works. But all this is not going to matter pretty soon. Alright, so we have our sort of setup here. Let's actually start adding you don't start adding clouds just yet necessarily. In this case, let's say that we want everything to fade into the sun, because the sun is casting a bunch of light. Let's actually make this a little bit smaller, I think. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller because I want it to be smaller, because I'm insecure about myself. Yuck, yuck, yuck. So let's actually try to fade everything into it. This is the top of the sky. This is the furthest away from the sun. If we go closer, it's going to more and more resemble what the actual color of the sun is, whatever that happens to be. Whether you're sampling the image, whether you're just coming up with something on the fly, it's going to end up sort of fading into this. So let's actually put that down and then try to blend it up into this region. So that, remember that thing I was talking about, how it kind of looks like a galaxy viewed from the side? Or sort of I don't know, what like a pancake that's billowing up in the center or something. It'll do that. So we do that. Let's go back to our image. We don't have to sample, but this is useful. And it's going to be brightest. It's going to be brightest near the center, but for the time being, just try to focus on getting everything to blend correctly. So the first thing you usually want to do in this case is to just make it so that the sky is blending away from that light source. And because there's going to be clouds and little bits of vapor all over the place, it's not going to be perfect, but just acting as a base layer, like this is how painting works. You just get your base information down, and then you start working on top of it. Like if you want... I'll just get rid of my sky real fast. If you wanted, say, like your sky to look like this, and let's say the sun, instead of being red, is because it was a very low sunset. Let's say that we're working with a more bright sunset. This case is going to be yellow. Let's make her water a little bit lighter. It doesn't really matter too much at this point. Let's say it looks like this. In this case, we could do this. Blend this out. Let's actually make it a little bit more like this color. Do the set number. Just blur the edges. Okay. And just do this. And just try to make sure everything gets nice and even in terms of its spectrum, whatever you want to call it. So it looks a bit more like that. And in this case, the sun needs to be more of a white color, I guess. And you'll just sort of blend this out so that it looks a bit more like a sun. Whoops. Did something without thinking about it. Do this on the sky. There we go. And the closer it is to the sun, the closer it is to the light source, I'll say it that way, the brighter and brighter it's going to be. So you'll need to go further and further over to your whites and just try to work it so that you're actually getting a nice even blend very, very close to the star. And the further and further out it gets, the weaker that spread gets. Which I'm not doing a very good job of right now because I'm trying to be too careful. But that's the rough idea of it. I'm trying to get to the point where I don't have to worry about explaining this and I can just start working. But that's just a general gist of how you do that. You're just trying to blend things. Okay, so we've established that the only thing really you need to worry about at this point is going to be adding in those clouds. One thing we can actually do real fast just to show it is let's bring back our primary. In this case, what I'm going to do, I just want to get these leaves or whatever here into the image. And to do that, I'm just going to make them black, because that's sort of how light works. In this case, I'm going to use my binary pen, because these are not clouds, these are hard shapes. What I'm going to do is just add in the sort of boundary area of where this is going to be happening. Excuse me. Actually, I'm being too careful. Let's do it this way. I'm going to put in the rough area where the shape is. This is just, whoops. This is just where all this stuff is going to be going on, right? This is the blob where this is going to be happening. And from this point, what I can do is just move out from this part. Just add in these little blades this way. That'll probably help me to not have to worry about being too careful about it. And you just paint things that way. And again, this is the binary pen that I'm using. The binary one is the one that doesn't have any blending on the sides. Now you can use this doing a normal brush. Just don't use it. Just don't use like a one that has a lot of blending on its edges. Otherwise, you're going to get plants that look like this, and you don't want that. Let's turn our primary off real fast. And notice that we kind of got something that's more or less okay. You want it to look nice and organic, like it's something that's happening naturally. You don't want it to be something that looks like a geometric shape or anything like that. And if you don't really know what exactly it should look like, you can just pull up some reference images and just look at plants until you see something that you like. And once you find something that you do like, just incorporate it into your little world that you're making. That's all you have to worry about. Otherwise, like for example, I think I'll put in like a cattail or two over here. I did that with a recent picture that I did of a Coco Bandicoot, which wasn't too naughty. I probably showed it earlier. Like this. We used to, whenever we farmed these swampy areas, my mother would like to go out and get cattails, actually, and bring them into the house to sort of decorate the area. I don't know why she did that, because eventually cattails, the actual tail part of it, they split open because they're trying to sow their little seeds, and they get all over the place. It was not a good idea on her part, but she always did it. Yes, she did, and it always backfired. But you can do it that way. So, since I'm not going to be caring too much about this picture, I'm just going to flip it, because I don't want to waste too much time. Just put you over here, because it doesn't matter too much. And this is my ground cover. This is going to go on top. So, we're done with that. We don't have to worry about that whatsoever. And it's supposed to look terrible because it's just a demonstration video. I'm not even going to upload this picture or anything like that. It's not important. Okay, so we're done with that. There's a water, sun, sky. Okay, so one thing that I'll mention is that the water is probably going to be the last thing that we're going to do. Because the thing about the water is it has the same rules, that everything needs to blend out from it. Like it needs to be like brightest here, then the reflection is going to be here. But it's also going to be reflecting all the light that's coming from the sky above it. So if you have like clouds up here, blah blah blah. Oh no, he's using the binary pen. If you have clouds up here, blah 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 blah, it doesn't matter too much. Then what you're going to end up doing is copying this, pasting it as a new layer. This is one way of doing it anyways. This is the way that I prefer. Then you would flip it. Let's turn that to a clipping layer to make it obvious. And you see what's happening. That I'm copying the whole sky and I'm putting it above it. And anything that's up here is going to be reflected down here. So in this case, you could like lower its opacity. Or you could set it to multiply or something and then lower its opacity. Just whatever looks good. So you're going to do something like that. If you had... like if these plants were on the edge over here, like if the beach or whatever extended out over here and there was some information here, then you would do the same thing. You would copy this and then flip it and put it on top of the water. And then lower its opacity so you get a nice reflection of this blending down like that. And that's how you do that. Just something to bear in mind if you're doing this particular sort of image. Okay. So let's actually get to it, I suppose. Doesn't matter too much what I'm doing here. Let's actually pick a better reference image than this one specifically. I want something that's a bit more vibrant. This one's okay. It's a nice small image, I guess. I think I want it to be a little bit brighter or a little bit darker than this, though. Okay, so let's actually start with this as our base. This is as tall as it's going to get. It could be darker, but I'm going to do that, but I'm going to lower the saturation a little bit. I'm going to go my own way, because that's what I like. Okay, so same rules. I'm going to make a new layer just to make it easier on myself in case I make an error. Just go through, put down our color, sample again if you want to. You don't have to sample necessarily, but it does make it a little bit easier. Just keep doing this. We need to worry about our oranges though. So something I'll do right here is I'm going to use a binary brush and just lay down a big wad of color right here. Just blow my wad all over the place. Just lay down a big wad of color. Put that down here. This is really how you're supposed to paint. You take the colors that you know 100% I want this to be here, and you put that color there. And then you say, well, I want the other color like this to be right here. And then once you have that color zone laid out, then you take your blending, whatever it is. If you're working in charcoal, it could be like a tortilla. Little thing, I like calling them tortillas. I think you actually pronounce it differently, but I think that's cute. And then you just go through and you just blend everything together. Or if you're using Photoshop or whatever, you sample it. If you're using Pictosil, you use a blending brush, whatever it happens to be. And you just go through and just keep doing this. So that you know that everything is nice and even and distributed exactly where it needs to be distributed. You do the same thing if you are trying to blend together lights and darks. Like if you're making a very black area here and you're making a very white area here for whatever reason, you say, I want grays. Then you just take whatever tool it is that you're using to blend, and then you just go between them and just blend them together over time so that you get something that's evenly distributed. Like this 101. This just painting, blending 101. That's how you do it. Okay, so we have our sort of sky area. That's pretty well set. Don't have to worry about that too much. If we want to play with this, you can adjust its values, but I think it's pretty well where I want it to be set one way or the other. And notice if I increase its saturation too much, we can start seeing where the errors happen to be. So I think I'm actually going to blend this a little bit more just to get those out of there, but not too much. Because that's just a result of the filtering that I was applying to it. Okay, so a bit more like that. Okay, it's still kind of doing the same thing, but we don't have to worry about that too much. Plus, in real life, it does sort of do that one way or the other. Okay, so let's lower our saturation back down, and we're okay. Alright, so next thing I want to do, at this point, like I merged that back into the sky, at this point we can actually merge the sun into this sky layer, and it's not going to matter too much. But for the time being, I'm not going to do that. Let's actually take this sun color, and actually, hold on, let me make this yellow real fast, just so that I know exactly what it is that I'm working with. Okay, so we have our yellow sun. Let's sample this real fast. And I'm going to take the same color yellow, and I'm going to blend out from this star. So we're going to kind of get the same general rule. Establish where exactly the color needs to be, then blend it out. And of course, since I'm using this brush, it's getting a very specific look about it. So I'm going to blur this out a little bit on the edges. Then I'm going to make my sun a bit more white. And that's how it's supposed to look. It's supposed to be sort of a white with a corona. Although in this case, it probably should be still a little bit smaller than this. Again, this is the advantage of putting everything on a layer and keeping it there. Let's go back to our white and use something that doesn't have a very high opacity so that you can just barely see the edge. And you just keep doing this over and over again. You just keep working up. One thing that I kept getting told during my classes in college, whenever I was getting my degree, is do not work down, always work up. What that means is don't try to, if you're drawing in a white sheet of paper, don't put down like a very heavy black and then try to fix it. Put down like a very light color, then try to work up to the black. That way you get a proper value. You get a proper range of values. So this is what we're going to be doing. It's a very slow process of getting everything to look just fine. Now, even this, as far as the sky, if it was just an empty sky, it would look fine. Not the best thing that's ever been made. And like I said before, this is not going to be an amazing painting, because I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Something I do want to do, though. I would like to get more of that orange into the sky. So I think I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to paint all that. I think I'll set to multiply, so that we'll get it to be a little bit darker. And that's more along the lines of what I wanted. But I'll play with its values a little bit, just to make sure. I kind of like the idea of having a little bit... This is more of what I wanted. -12. Okay. It's always important before you commit to anything, just to play with it a little bit. That way you know exactly what it is that you want. Okay, so let's merge that down. And I think we're kind of done for the time being in terms of just setting that up. Although I would like to have one more round with this little bitty sun. I'm going to sample it. Put out on my edges here. And the size of your brush is also going to... Like if you have a really big brush and you try to blur things out, it's going to put it all over the place. Whereas if you use a smaller brush, you do the sides, you're obviously going to get a completely different look. So it's important to know when to be careful and when not to be careful. So something a bit more like that. Make it a little bit bigger so I can spread this out a little bit more. Which I'm going to lose some of my corona. So in this case, what I'm actually going to do is make another layer and just keep doing this over and over again. And I'm making a new layer so I don't interfere with the work that I've already done. This is the only reason why I'm doing that. So don't worry too much about, oh, he's doing it. Don't worry. Just whenever you're doing these things, the important thing is mainly just enjoy yourself. The thing that I kind of encounter a lot with people is that they get so frustrated so easily with while they're working, they see something didn't work out the way they wanted, and they want to tear out their hair. It's like, no, it's failing. But the whole point of doing this is it's supposed to be relaxing. Like, you're just supposed to keep working with it, not because, oh, it's not right, it's not right. Just view it from the perspective of, oh, what can I, like, let me just play with this. Like, don't approach it from the perspective of this is something that you're going to throw out. Because it doesn't matter. Like, this is just for fun. Just keep doing things, like trying, oh, I'm going to change this layer to screen. Oh, it didn't do anything. I'm going to change it to luminosity. Wow, luminosity did something. I think I'll keep it this way. But it's way too bright around here. Now it looks like an atom bomb. I'm not exterminating the Japanese. Why would I do that? That's a terrible thing to say. So I'm going to reduce its value down a little bit so that I get something that's a bit more even. And that's just what I did just now, in addition to insulting the Japanese. So now what I'm going to do is... see if I can get this just right. We're going to merge everything down into my sky layer. And we're going to work with this as our base. And we haven't started adding clouds just yet. But now that we have the sky exactly how we want it, I'm going to make a new layer. And this is where all of our clouds are going to be. Now, the important thing here whenever you're making little bitty clouds is to decide what kind of clouds that you want. Like here's, it's just looking images again. Hello plane. Think about copying these pictures. They're sometimes way too big. Like we have clouds that are sort of like this. Like there are different kinds of clouds, you know, cumulus and remembering high school all over again doing that. But you have big puffy clouds. You have these ones that are a bit more spread out. Sometimes you have ones that are just really thin clouds up in the sky. You have ones that are just a little bitty isolated, like baby clouds here and there. It just depends on what you want to do. And the nice thing about drawing clouds is that there's no rules for it. It's not like drawing a person where, oh no, their thigh exploded, and now all the color for their thigh is across 3/4 of the canvas because I did something wrong. It's not like that. The nice thing about clouds is that clouds can look pretty much like anything, and it doesn't really matter as long as they look sort of cloudy. But there are rules. And you'll see here, like, these clouds are a bit more thin, but you notice that the clouds here are casting light the closer that they get to the source of the light. And the further away they get, then the darker they become. In the case with these clouds over here, you notice that the rim is shining because these clouds are actually in the way of a light source. So this rim lighting that they're getting is a result of the sun that's behind them. And they're very dark on this side because that's what we're seeing. If you were to, like, get behind these clouds on the other side where the sun is and look at them, they would be extremely bright and vivid. The other day I was actually shopping and I left and I noticed everyone outside looking up at the sky. I turned, it looked like the whole sky was on fire because it had just rained and the clouds were causing the light source from the sun to cast just so that all the clouds everywhere were this bright, incredibly livid orange. It's pretty neat. Everyone enjoyed that day. It was a nice day for everyone. I'm going to make this a little bit darker. I think I'm actually going to blend a little bit of blue in here too. I'm going to make a new layer. Do this. Blend it out a little bit. But not too much. Get everything nice and blended. And then set it to multiply or something. See, multiply makes it too dark. Screen makes it too light. Luminosity certainly does. Overlay kind of creates too much of a binary look to it. Shade, luminosity, and shade. Photoshop has more options, but none of the ones in Psi are really working for me right here. So what I might do is to set it to normal and just lower its opacity value so that I get a nicer blend. And once I do that, remember that brown that we got earlier on? This is sort of more what we should be aiming for, which would be more like in this area. I'm going to pick a purple, then I'm going to lower its saturation value down. I just want a little bit more saturation in that area is basically all I want. Do that. And at this point, I think I might be able to set it to something else. Screen overlay. Overlay looks okay. Something a bit more like that, I guess. I just want to make sure that it looks sort of more blue as it gets further in the back. Something a bit more like this, I guess. Okay, so let's blur it one more time. And notice that we're not really getting too much blur right here because it's not merged into one layer yet. So let's merge that down. Sample it. Blend that out a little bit to fix it up. And that looks okay. Okay, so let's undo that real fast to see what it looked like before. So it looked like this before. Now it looks a bit more like that. That's okay. I like that. That's good enough. Okay, so establishing our clouds. In this case, it doesn't matter too much where the clouds are, what they're doing. You can pick a brighter color if you want. Just be sure to adjust their color later on. And be sure you're not working on the same layer as your sky. You just have to know exactly what it is that you're doing. The nice thing about working digitally is that these things exist so that it makes your life a little bit easier. So first thing I'm going to do is just figure out what exactly it is that I want for my clouds. And I think I want a little bit of, I want some of the ones in the back to be sort of small and faded, and I want the ones up here to sort of show up a little bit better. And they just keep getting bigger and bigger as you get further and further to the viewer. So you end up with something that looks a bit more like this. And I think I want a little bit of open space. And just using this binary pen just to establish the blobs where the clouds happen to be. Clouds, kind of easy to draw, kind of easy to screw up too, though. That's a weird thing about clouds. You can make them look not cloudy very easily. Like right now, they don't look cloudy at all. They kind of just look like, I don't know, vomit. Good old vomit. Yes, sir. Okay. So we established that. Use a brush. In this case, I'm not going to use my blur brush. I'm going to use my blending one just to try to get some edges down here. And we'll sort of blend things around. The nice thing about having a texture on your brush, in this case I'm using spread and noise once again, gives a little bit more life, a little bit more visual color, as it were. Not literal color, but, just sort of some personality color. So that we get ourselves at least a little bit of blending. Doesn't have to look perfect. Don't worry about it too much. Just get everything working. Just get yourself going. That's one of the things that you sort of learn whenever you're an adult, is you don't have to do things right, but you do have to start. You can't go anywhere unless you get into the car and start moving. Maybe you don't know exactly where it is that you want to go just yet, but you're definitely not going anywhere if you're sitting still. If you sit there planning your whole life, you'll never go anywhere. So, something like that, I guess, would be fine. I think I'll blur some of this over here. And one of the fun things to do with clouds like this, I'm going to blur this in, is once we have that, we can use this as sort of the base for the whole cloud cover. So we'll say, this is the place where the clouds absolutely will be, and we can set that to like multiply or something, so that we get ourselves something that is actually blending in with the sky behind us. If we didn't have like multiply layers and things like that, then we would actually have to rely entirely on just eye work. Like we would actually have to be very careful about our choices of color and whatnot. So I'm going to do that. Now that we set it to multiply, you notice that we're getting a little bit more evenness in terms of how we're working. It's blending in more nicely with the background, and we're having to worry about a lot less. And I just figured that out by just selecting layer and just thinking, yeah, I kind of like the look of that. And I just rolled with it. I didn't have a big plan for it. I just kept doing stuff until I saw something that actually worked. And that's how you do it. Nothing to worry about there. I always like doing sunsets because it gets you a very large range of color. Like if you're working with something that is very bright blue or something, like you have a character that's white, or they have bright green hair or something crazy. The sunset is a nice way of sort of creating a complementary color in the background that accentuates that. That's a nice thing about it. Sunsets are very good for that sort of thing. And sunsets don't come in a wide variety of colors, like you're not going to have a green sunset necessarily. But, you have a choice of like a more blue-looking one that's still creating some purples and reds here and there. You have, like what I'm doing here, where it's more of a brownish sort of red color. Or you can have one that's like very sort of a faded white, but it's blending into a more of a blue sort of thing. Like there's all sorts of things you can do to play with. It's very nice. Like sunsets for that reason. Plus they're very pretty. Sunsets are sort of like fire, like a bonfire. People stare at the bonfires and they start reminiscing about things and feeling emotions and something. It's very primal with people. That's the weird thing about sunsets and fires and things. The same sort of feeling of like mystification or whatever that you get whenever you look at a sunset is the same feeling that your ancestors had thousands of years ago. The same sort of magic that they feel is the same sort of magic that you are also feeling. It's something that connects all of us. Everyone has the same sort of experience whenever they look at such a thing. You don't run into too many people that feel contempt whenever they see a sunset, unless they have some sort of bad memory of sunsets at some point or something crazy. So, you notice what I've been doing here? I'm just blending things together and just seeing if it looks okay. Just saying, I kind of like that, I don't like that. Let's do the same thing again, one more time. Make another layer. And doing these layers over and over again is a good way of getting a look that you sort of approve of. Like if you try to work to one layer, you can create problems because you're kind of ruining the aspects that you do like and incorporating things that you don't necessarily like. Like you notice my original plan of having the tiny little... It doesn't quite look the same as whenever I pitched sort of the idea of what I was going to be doing. And that's just a result of me playing and just relaxing and just deciding, oh, I like this, I don't like this. I'm not committing to anything, I'm not worrying about it. It could look good, it could look bad. But it's just a nice, relaxing way of completely unfocusing and just letting your hand just go crazy and do what it wants to do. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. There's no commitments. They're just clouds. They just exist. They float. Their life is in service to the enjoyment of your beastly eyes. That's pretty much it. Just like pornography. That's what the sky is. It's a nature's pornography. Just for you. Made just for you. Okay. So, In this case, it's more, there's a lot of vapor in the air, and so you're getting a lot more variation in terms of color and where everything is. Like, you're seeing a lot of clouds. So let's actually merge that down a little bit. I want to blend this together a little bit more. And if you get to the point where you think, I like the look of this as a base layer, and I want to keep everything here, at that point you would merge down the layer if you're committed to it, and you decided that it's your favorite baby child, and you just keep working back over on top of it. So that's what I'll do there. So now we have something that more or less kind of passes for a sky, but again, it could look better. So let's just add a little bit more on top of it. So let's just start putting stuff like as a lighter color. And it doesn't really matter what it is. Like, I don't have any plan here. Just, let's say that this is like rim light right here. And if it doesn't look quite right at this point, we can always just add in some darker area over here to make it look a bit more natural. But for the time being, it doesn't matter too much. We'll do the same thing over here, I guess. Something like that. It's funny to think that these pretty sunsets are caused by this incredibly violent thing that's burning billions of feet away. Something about it being feet amuses me. Just like history. Yes, sir, just like history. The further away it gets, the prettier it becomes. If you're right up in it, it doesn't matter whether it's a sunset or a sunrise. Doesn't matter. Still incredibly violent, very scary if you're right on top of it. The further away it is, the prettier it becomes. It's just a matter of distance. Alright. So, just some basic ideas that I'm putting down here. Just stuff like that. Let's blend this a little bit. And you'll think, well, that doesn't look right at all. I'm going to adjust its layers. I'm going to see what happens. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen yet. But I'm sure it'll look sort of cloud-like. Don't want it to look like squall, though. No, don't want that. Or any Zidanes. You don't want those either. Those are just awful. Okay, so blend this out. Make it look a little bit more cloudy. Getting ourselves less of a harsh light to it. In some cases, you want to leave it looking a little bit harsh, because if you make everything blended very evenly, then it doesn't look real, because that's not how light actually works. Like in this case down here, I actually do want it to blend a little bit more. Especially if it has this fading like this, that reminds me of like rainy clouds. Ones that have been doing that a lot. Get something that looks like that. See how that looks pretty nice, doesn't it? I didn't have a plan for it, it just happened. This nice thing about working with clouds. You don't have to worry about anything. They just sort of exist, or they don't exist. They just are. Okay. So like that. That's not quite where I want it to be, though. So let's actually play with some of our layers. We don't want multiply again. I would like it to be lighter. So screen, overlay, that does create an interesting effect. Luminosity. Yeah. This is probably, what you want to look for here whenever you're doing this is not necessarily the color, but how it's going to be blending. Like in this case, it's so close to the sky here that we're getting very hard, like, light right here. And we can adjust its opacity and make it look a little bit more like that. That way, I guess you might want to avoid something that's not like this. This is okay. It does sort of the same thing that luminosity does, because it's luminosity and shade. You can also use this ordinary normal and just lower that down. In this case, that wouldn't probably be strong enough for a final image, but that would be good if you're creating more of that base sky that we were talking about. Of course, I'm sure there's plenty of people that do this for a living, like they're industrial artists, and they would probably watch this and get super, oh, you're not doing it, you're not teaching them right. I'm just introducing people to things. Don't worry too much about it, Mr. Industrial Man. Like, I know that you painted for Lord of the Rings or whatever, but Not all of us do that, and not everyone's going to be introduced to industrial design, of all things. Okay, so I think what I would like to do, use luminosity. Let's play with the colors a little bit and see what we get. See, you can go blue, but it doesn't really mesh with how light actually works. One thing that we can do, I think I want it to be sort of more like that. Let's try to get it to where it fades correctly. Adjust its luminosity to be just so. Okay, so that's a bit more what I wanted. Let's try to blend this out a little bit. Get rid of those harsh edges. Because it's a little bit too much color that we were getting in those areas. Let's blend this down too a little bit. Just a little bit. Get something that looks a bit more like that. So that's a nice sort of medium cloud area. That works for our purposes. We can add in a little bit more, though. So this is our base. This is the sort of intermediate area. Let's put in like one or two itty-bitty little like boogers here and there. Little bitty guys. And those, I think I actually want to... a little bit more blending, I guess. Don't want them to get too large, though. Don't want them to get big heads. You don't want little guys to get too big of a head too soon. Or else they never grow. They never get any bigger than they are. They just think that they're getting bigger. That's right. Okay. So in this case, what I actually think I want to do is work on the rim lighting for these. So I'm going to make the inside dark. I'm going to leave the outside, the exterior of the cloud, light for the time being. Just to see if we get something that looks a little bit more unique. Let's just do just these guys right fast and see what happens. So multiply. Yeah, that would work, sort of. Screen, overlay. Overlay would be good for getting it to blend correctly, I guess. Shade, luminosity, and shade. Luminosity and shade would work a little bit better if it were not quite so saturated, I think. So let's actually move this away. Get something like that. And I think I'm going to reduce its opacity. Get something that looks a bit more like that, I guess. Wonder what happens if I move them over here. Nah, I don't like the look of that. Let's leave them right where they are, I guess. Do something a bit more like that. Those don't really look too realistic, though. Let's actually blend this out just a little bit. Let's give it a little bit of blending. Not too much, or else they lose their identity completely. Just enough so that it kind of just looks like they just sort of exist in the background. Also, sort of how you do texture work. You apply something, and then you just kind of try to work it into the image one way or the other. So I could do it that way. Multiply, screen. Well, actually, shade, yeah. Let's bring that back up. More like that. Then lower its opacity back down. That looks a bit more natural. I think I want to move this over to the side again, though. If you have it right smack down in the center, it looks a little bit weird. Okay, that's fine, I guess. So that was one experiment I did just for the hell of it. Didn't quite come out the way that I wanted it to, though. That's okay. It turned out to be something else. So now what I think I'll do, for fun, is I'm going to put in some rim lighting on the edge of these clouds. I'll start with, well, maybe I won't start with anything. Where am I here? There we go. I'll start with binary pin, just for the sake of it. Put in the rim light where I think it should be. Won't be perfect. Again, I'm working on another layer, so it doesn't matter too much. In this case, I'm going to be using orange so that I can actually see what I'm doing, but I'll probably adjust the color later here in a bit. Some of these will be harsher than others. And this is sort of the detail that I'm just putting in for the clouds. like most of this is going to be very faded and blended because you're not supposed to see what's going on because of the way that light works. The closer it is to this light, the more like itty bitty tiny little shadows you're going to be getting with the water vapor. But the further away you get, the less light it's going to be the less shadows are going to be colliding. Then it's going to be a bit more even, so you get less detail. So something sort of like that. And here, let's actually start to blend this a little bit. And I kind of, at this point, I guess you do sort of start to want to worry about doing things right or wrong, in the sense of the clouds are now where they are. You've established who they are, what they're doing, where they're flying around to, and whatnot. So if you start giving them rim lighting, you can't just put rim light like in the middle of the screen or something. Like, you still have to know that things exist in the world that you're making. So let's do that, just for the hell of it. Don't worry too much about it being right or wrong. Just enjoy the process. And if you have more time, like I don't have too much time to work in this right now, so I didn't get to enjoy myself as much as I could have because of you. Because of you dirty little sinners. Then instead, I'm just going to try to go as fast as I possibly can. Not worry too much about it. But I still have to blend these things out. So, just get your edges in here. Give it a bit more of an identity. You can add a little extra fringes where, like, you start defining the shape of the thing. Like, the clouds themselves are just fumes. They're just vapor flying around. But they still do have shapes. That's the fun thing about clouds, is that you can define them, but you don't have to. You can do anything that you want with them. It doesn't really matter one way or the other. Okay. So I think I'm going to blur this out right here. A little bit more. Put a little bit of extra rim lighting right here. Okay, and I think we're more or less set for our rim lighting. It's probably not going to work too well, but it might do something. Now let's say luminosity, see what happens. Okay, that's obviously way too harsh. Let's get on these edges and try to pull this back into the body of the cloud. Luminosity is good for this because you can see exactly where all the hard lighting is. So you can tell exactly what sort of problems that you're going to be running into. Okay, and it's not going to be this harsh in the first place. Alright, same thing on this side. You kind of have to get used to what sort of stroke that you need to make. One of my instructors always talked about moves, like he would describe artists as having different sorts of moves. And he talked about that in terms of a stroke value. Like some people have a move they do something that's very hard and long or something. Or like me, I tend to have lots of itty bitty little strokes. That's sort of my move. I'm a bit more gentle, but I'm also kind of fast with it. That doesn't sound good at all, does it? No, that sounds quite the opposite of what the ladies like. Well, let's not discuss that too much, though. All right, so. But whenever you're working, if you find that you have, like, you're more gestural, or if you find that you're more, like, you definitely want to take things slow, then feel free to. Like, everyone is a little bit different. So that's sort of where I want it to be. Let's adjust its lighting values now. I think I do sort of want it to be in sort of that range, but I don't want it to be as harsh. Some of the, like, this side looks okay, but this side not so much. Okay, so luminosity probably is not the way to go. Screen, not so much. Luminosity and shades, way worse. Wonder what happened if I reduce saturation value. It's not too great. It's not too bad either, though. Of course, you could also just go back to normal and just lower its value down a little bit. Change the saturation values. That makes it look a little bit more natural. But did that actually do anything? Yeah, it kind of did. Gave it a little bit more volume. Not quite what I wanted, though. But that's okay. That's not too bad. The main thing was whether or not it looked like it might actually have any details associated with it or not. So that's okay. I think actually what I want to do real fast, though, is I'm going to play and see what happens if I try to add a little bit more of value to the way that everything blends together right here. So I'm going to put some yellow down here, orange in the middle, red furthest away. Then I'm going to set it to multiply after I blur it. And that'll cause it to have a little bit more evenness about it. And that will darken it, of course. So you get something that looks a bit more like that. Just its value a little bit. You don't want it to strain to the greens or anything. So we do that, pull it up a little bit. And I think I want the clouds to be that color. That saturation value. So what I'm actually going to do is use my eraser. To get about 500. That's my density is too high, so let's change this down to 1. And I'll get rid of some of this. Windows Update has been updating a bunch. That's causing my eraser specifically for some bizarre reason to freeze a little bit. Okay, so let's blur that down a little bit just to make sure that we didn't lose anything. So this is a bit more what I wanted. And you see what it did. Made the sky look a little bit more even. Alright, so since we're doing a video, I'm not going to overwork this too much. But let's say that this is our sky. Like, we've done everything that we actually wanted to do with it. Now we have the water still to worry about. Like, it's still here, still doing its job. If we disable it, we see the mess that we made under it, right? Okay. So, what we actually want to do now, copy our whole sky. Let's paste it. Take it up above our water. Then flip it vertically. And we can turn on our clipping group. But if you don't have clipping group, it doesn't really matter too much because you still have to do the same thing. You have to take your little transform thing and pull it all the way down to where it needs to be. I'm going to use clipping group one way or the other. And you want to get to where you can actually see the sun. Like, you want to take it to where you actually see the sun that you place down. Let's move this a little further away. Just put it wherever you feel like you need it to be. Oh, come on now. Come on. Behave yourself. So we get something a bit more like that. Now, obviously, it's not going to look like that. Let's set it to multiply, and this is a bit too much. We can adjust the value of our water. We're still getting a little bit too much. And this is where you would just want to spend some time playing with it. Just trying different things, seeing what happens, so that you can decide for yourself what looks best to you. You can do something like that. This is really too much, though. To me, I think what I actually need to do is set it to normal and just lower its value down, and then adjust what the water looks like. And actually, I probably don't have too much time for it. But really what you should be doing here is make a new sort of area for the water. We never did this for the water, but you need to sort of texture it. And you can use this literally in Photoshop, use a texture and just apply water to it. You can do it this way and very slowly sort of work out a texture. Or I could like pull up a water texture off of Google, for example. Or you can make your own, or whatever you need to do, whatever you feel is necessary. Just find one that you like. One that's actually high enough resolution, for that matter, that it actually will work correctly. Yeah, that's fine. Make sure that it's the right size. Of course, this looks terrible the way that I'm doing it, but I'm just doing it for the sake of showcasing this. I think actually it could probably be fixed a little bit if I just turned it. If it got turned, as the young people say these days. Whatever that means, I don't know. A bit more like that. Let's let it multiply. Yeah, that doesn't look quite right. Luminosity and shade, maybe? Let's adjust its lighting. Slightly more natural. So like that. And I'm going to reduce its opacity. Want it to just barely be visible. Okay. And same thing with you. Just enough that we get barely the reflection in there. Whatever screen would be a little bit better. Not too much. So our base value for the water actually needs a little bit different in terms of its color. So like that. Looks a bit more watery that way, I'd say. Okay. Now, one other thing that we need to do here, let's actually merge this down. Be sure that inside you have to merge them all one at a time or else you get weird effects that you didn't want. And you can just keep working back over this, do things like add a bit more color to it, yellow right here, orange over here, blur those together. No more of that. Put this down. Binary would probably work better. A little bit of white. A little bit more of an orangish sort of thing right here. Appropriate brush size. Blend it out a little bit. And then blur it again. Get something that looks a bit more like that. You can screen it or something. Multiply. Probably look a little bit better. Slightly better, yeah. Okay. But more importantly, I guess, I need to add a little bit more of a horizon line in terms of light. Because you remember how the sun looked in all those pictures. Remember, I was talking about the little galaxy thing. So you need a bit more of a rim light here. And I'm going to put this over on top of both of these. So that I know exactly what I'm doing. Let's change it to where I can see where it's blending. It's not going to be this stark of a contrast, but we're going to work this way for the time being. So let's blend this out so that it actually looks like a sunset. Not much on top. Just like this. You don't want too much over the water either. Okay, so a bit more like that. Let's actually reduce this down a little bit. Not too much, or else we're going to lose the effect. And you get something that looks a bit more like that. Alright, so let's keep it there for the time being, because I don't want to merge it just yet. One last bit, I want to put in some on the water specifically, so let's make this a clipping group. I'm trying to explain as much as I possibly can. And let's just make our little part where the sun and the water sort of blends towards the viewer. That sort of deal. A bit more like this, I guess. Something that looks a bit more like that. That's not going to be perfect, so let's blend it a little bit. Remember to use your blending options on your layers. Be sure to flip your canvas, because if you don't, you might end up with something that doesn't look quite right. I think I'll actually copy, paste it, flip it, merge it into itself, and then erase a little bit off the tip end here. If I can get my brush to work correctly, because of Windows Update screwing it up. Whenever Windows updates, it typically fucks up the way that you can paint inside for some bizarre reason. Not sure why exactly. Okay, gonna have to make another layer on top of this just in case. Luminosity, pull that down. Actually, let's get rid of that real fast. I need to be more distinct with this. I think I'm gonna turn this white actually. And I just have to be a little bit more careful with my brush strokes. I need to make this a little bit smaller, because it needs to get smaller the closer it gets to the viewer, and it thins out a little bit. And you know that from just looking at pictures of sunsets, because it's reflecting off this water. So it looks something a bit more like that, I guess. And it's not completely even, it sort of staggers side to side because of the way that light works. So I think it looks a bit more like that, I suppose. And it's not perfectly straight, so we can sort of fix that a little bit by blurring the edges. So we get something a bit more like that. Okay. So that's more or less how it's done. I think that's okay for as far as the demonstration goes. Let's merge that down. Water and sky are now one layer, called sky. Let's merge this down as well. Our ground is still there. Everything's nice and set up. I just want to make some touch-ups real fast, even though it doesn't matter, but let's make some touch-ups. I think I want to be a bit more distinct as far as the light from the sun, because we made it so incredibly bright that we need to make sure that it looks a bit more natural. Not too much, though. So we're going to take the same color as the sun and just put it where we think that it would be colliding with the bottoms of these clouds. But not too much. So let's blend it back into the clouds a little bit. Just got to have a light touch for things like this. This is not the most beautiful sunset I've ever drawn or anything, but it gets the job done. Overlay is not really getting what I want. Luminosity sort of does. Needs to be reduced a little bit. Let's reduce its darkness. Not quite exactly what I wanted. It's a bit more like it, though. Okay, it's blur to be safe. And there we go, more or less. Okay, that's not too bad for a short amount of time that I spent on it. So if you want to do anything, like if you find that your layers interfering, you can do one last little touch-up thing where you merge all the layers together. You don't have to. You could also just like do this where you sample above the layer onto another layer so that you don't have to worry about such things. And just work back over on top of it until you get exactly what it is that you're wanting. And you can turn it on and off to see what it is that you did or didn't do correctly. That sort of thing. But in my case, I think I just want to blend this down a little bit and then we'll be done. Okay, so the only other thing that I say that you really could do is give a little bit of rim lighting to this ground, this perfectly mirrored ground. So one way we could actually do that is let's see. Trying to think of a way around it. A lot of art is just problem solving. I think I'm actually going to make a copy of this side. Then we will turn this yellow with a clipping group. I'll make it much smaller, or actually much larger, I should say. It doesn't really solve our problem, though. What I was going to do, actually, is move that down. You see, I'm trying to do this a hobo way, but doing it very quickly, but it's not going to work. Because it's too completely, it's not spaced that same way. But if we're going to do it, since I made this a binary thing, what I could do is just do it this way. Like invert it. And change the selection or so forth and so on. I think also the selection pin. I wonder if the Yeah, it works that way. I forgot. Okay. Yeah, the only other way you can really do it is just using the wand. It's probably the best way of doing it, I suppose. So let's actually wand off these areas. And once we do that, I guess the best way of doing this, let's just try something. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Let's try it. Okay, actually, let me think about this. We can invert it, change the selection by incrementing it in reverse, invert it again, apply that, and then you would change, kind of doing this more as a demonstration. I'm not going to actually add rim lighting to it, but I just wanted to demonstrate what rim lighting would be. And do that so that we're only painting the very middle and we're still leaving the edges. Then we'll change this to black. And this ground we would change into the actual rim lighting. So this looks terrible because I'm just demonstrating it real fast, but this is the general idea. We can actually manage that a little bit. But you guys get the idea. If you're actually doing rim lighting like this for the ground, what you would actually want to do is just go through and just add it in by hand. I was just trying to demonstrate it real fast to show you what the rim lighting was going to be. You would do it like this. You would go in and just like paint over the edges so that you get that nice rim lighting on the side. But I'm not doing that because it is way too time intensive. But you see how it would actually look. You would end up with something that looks a bit more like that. But that's the idea. But again, we're not going to be doing that. But I just wanted to make sure that you guys saw what your options were. All right, so sunset. This is the general way that you do it. You could make a sunset a million times over and get completely different results every time. Like, they're not going to look exactly the same. Just do minor touch-ups, whatever you want to do. So that's why I like doing sunsets. They can be relaxing if you let them be. Like, you can drive yourself crazy doing anything, but this is the nice thing about doing a sunset. That's how I do them. Whenever I do my little paintings, whenever I want a nice generic looking background in there, this is the way that I personally do it. Again, you can do this 100 times and get completely different results. Like a lot of the times I like to add something that has, like I would put in like a bit more, like, I'm going to start overworking the image if I continue. So that's the reason why I'm trying to not do this, but like you can start putting in more things in the background to give it a bit more depth. And you can just start overworking the image over and over again. Or, you know, overworking clouds can not be too bad. So you get something that's a bit more dramatic. Like you can just keep adding in more and more stuff like this. Let's reduce it a little bit. So you just keep giving more and more of a pronounced detail to your clouds. And stuff like that. You just play with it. That's the fun of it. Okay. But you guys get the idea. That was an 1.5-hour video. I almost started the video by saying, I'll do a short little video and then cackle to myself. I had a plan. It's like, I'll make that joke and then just cackle incessantly. But I decided not to do that. You guys get the idea. Alright, so for anyone that's actually ever wondered, how do I do backgrounds? That's how I do backgrounds. I do them as fast and as lazy as I possibly can, but I also try to make sure that I can actually relax while I do it. So, you guys get the idea. Now, compare that to our actual sunsets that we started out with. They obviously do not look realistic. If we wanted to actually look realistic, you could, one, do a matte painting, which you're just taking photos, and then just blending them together and changing their saturation values and so forth and so on to actually look that way. Or you can just spend way more time on it, zoom in way more, and just get way more elaborate with it. But to me, that's more work than I want to do. It's not relaxing, so I don't do it that way. So, this is how you do it. Plus, I'm usually, with my things, there's usually an illustration of some sort of sexy furry girl or something stupid in the front. And that obviously does not look realistic, so why would you put something realistic looking in the back? So even whenever you're doing an illustrated sunset like this, you don't want it to get too realistic looking or else it gets kind of weird. Okay, so you guys get the idea. Leave your thoughts in the comments below so that I can freely ignore them. Explore on your own time and enjoy yourself. This is the most important thing. That's mainly what I want you guys to do. You don't have to be a great artist. You just have to be able to actually pretend that you're a great artist. That's what I like to do. And the funny thing is about pretending to be someone is if you spend enough time pretending to be someone, you end up one day waking up and you are that person. That's the thing about changing yourself or changing behavior, is the more time that you spend actually thinking that you're something, the easier it is to actually accidentally transform into it, which can be a danger as well as a benefit. So if you want to be an artist, if you want anything like that, just keep at it. Just pretend that you are. Just enjoy yourself. And that's the key to it. All right, so farewell, sunset, you destructive force of nature that's more beautiful as you view it from a distance. Say goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.